Okay, so yeah, super fun, exciting topic today. So I appreciate everybody that's joining us. I know this is not one of the more glamorous trainings that we do, but definitely one that is necessary and needed. And I think also hitting on some topics that can sometimes be frustrating or confusing for folks. And so I do appreciate you guys, like I said, taking the time to participate in today's training. I know it's, like I said, not a super fun topic. So. Okay, so this is actually going to be one of our first mentees. And so I am going to pull that up and hopefully, okay, perfect. So you guys are already on it. So can you guys see my screen okay too? So how does making a report of child abuse and or neglect make you feel? So this is where you're going to use Menti. You can do as many words as you want. But yeah, what kind of feelings, emotions does that evoke in you? And that could be even making a report in a professional capacity, like your role as CASA, or even just, my gosh, what if you had to call in a report on a neighbor or a family member, somebody like that. So just want to kind of get out there right now. How does it make you feel just even thinking about having to make a report of child abuse or neglect? So you guys can see on the screen as people are typing in, anxious, worried. And I think the bigger the word, that means the more people are doing it too. So we got scary, sad, absolutely, right? Not only for us and the feelings that we're evoking, but it also means that something bad may be happening to kids, right? So that is sad. Concerned, you got some anxiety, anxious, yeah, because you're definitely getting on my word. Concerned, but thankful. I like that too. Thankful that there is a place that you can make a report, right? That there's somebody that you can pass that concern on to. So that's also a good thing. Relieved. I like that too. Yeah, so there says, yeah, you can pass it on that you ultimately don't have to make that decision of is it happening or not. I can do my job, I can pass on my concerns and let the experts, let the professionals make that decision, right? So there is some of that relief there too. Yeah. So yeah, really kind of in the most part, pretty negative thoughts, feelings, right? It's not, like I said, something that we look forward to doing. It's not something that necessarily feels good to have to do. But unfortunately, it is one of those necessary things that in our roles we are sometimes going to have to do. We're going to have to sometimes make that report. We're going to have to sometimes follow up, not only in our professional roles, but also in our personal life too. So I just want to make sure and recognize that I recognize that this is not an easy thing and that what we are asking you to do or what you're mandated to do, I understand and I see you and I hear you that it's not always a fun thing and it is anxiety provoking. So the goal of today's training really is to how do we give you the more tools and understanding of how to make the report. My hope is that the more you understand, what is that going to look like when I call in? What are they going to do with my information? If we understand the process, sometimes it makes it just a little bit easier to be able to make that phone call if we have to. So thank you guys. Thank you guys for doing that. Okay. So who are mandated reporters? We're one of them. So you kind of see a list here. It's going to be, none of these are probably going to surprise you as far as who has to make that call as a professional or in their official capacity. So obviously anybody medical, so doctors, nurses, anybody that you're seeing medical wise, religious healers, school officials, right? So anybody in official school capacity, whether you are a teacher, whether you are an assistant in the classroom, the principal, the counselor, you're gonna have to do that. Anybody in the social work field, so anybody working, in child welfare, that also includes anybody that's employing or working at a child care facility. That could be your little ones, all the way up to your group homes, to your institutions, but really anybody that's working in a child care facility. That's the next one. So peace officers or law enforcement officials, right? So lots of times you guys will see that cases come to child welfare through law enforcement, right? They pull somebody over for a DUI or for drugs and there's children in the car, right? They're going to call CPS. They go out and they do a drug bust and there's kids in the home. They're going to call child welfare. And so any of those, any member of the clergy, so the church, which is fascinating, right? So if somebody is coming and they are going to confession and they confess something that's, that they need to report, they're going to do that. Here's where we fit in, right? So the guardian ad litem or us, the CASAs. So anybody that is out there working with kids, so we are mandated reporters. Okay. And then an employee entity, anybody that really contracts with the department and to providing those direct services to children. So that's really going to be your folks that, let's say visitation folks, right? Anybody that's working in the home, providing in-home services, like your St. John Cares people, anybody that's contracting or working with any of the families that we're working on that are providing those direct services to family and children are also going to be mandated reporters. Okay. Some of the interesting, I think, facts and notes. Why would a veterinarian be a mandated reporter? I don't have it on this list, but why would a veterinarian be a mandated reporter, do you guys think? Feel free to unmute yourself if anybody has any thoughts or ideas. Why would that?
So my guess is that it would be because the animal may have maybe being abused, and oftentimes they're abused along with the owner.
Yeah, the children. Yeah, Denise, exactly. So we often see a correlation between animal abuse and child abuse. And so, yes, so if they are seeing kind of, if they're feeling like, yeah, animals are being abused, are there children in the home? Is there other concerns possibly that the children are being abused? Because unfortunately, there is that correlation. I'm sure a lot of you guys know that there was actually child welfare came out of actually animal protection, and there was things in place for animals before they were for children, which is kind of fascinating. The other thing that really isn't applicable anymore, maybe in some states, and for those of us on here that are a little bit older, film processors. So when we used to take the film and turn that in, and then you had to send it off or Walmart or wherever. So film processors also used to be mandated reporters. Like I said, that really doesn't happen much anymore. So here in Montana, it's actually a little bit different than some states. And actually Colorado, I saw just changed their law that you guys are only mandated reporters in your official capacity. So only when you're in your official role or on the job per se of CASA. Okay. So when you're not acting in your official capacity or role, yes, I would still obviously encourage you to report concerns of abuse, but you no longer fall under that guise that you're mandated, that you're mandatory to report child abuse or neglect. If you come across it, so this would fall in the line of neighbors, of friends. If you're out to dinner and you have a concern, you see something at Walmart in the Walmart parking lot. These are all actually situations that have been called in. You're technically not required in your unprofessional capacity, but again, like I said, I would still highly recommend that you make those reports, right? We all care about kids. We don't want to see those things happening. But yes, that's definitely going to be on you on your own accord. Okay. Okay, so when is a report required? So really what the statute, what the law says is you know or you have a reasonable cause to suspect that abuse or neglect is happening, right? So this could be information that you've received in your official capacity. It could be something that you have witnessed. And so it could come to you at any kind of different things, but it really is going to be when you have that reasonable cause to suspect. Okay. So you don't have to know for sure that it's happening, but you have that reasonable cause. You're believing. Really what that means is that reasonable cause, what that means is that it would cause a reasonable person, which I feel like we are all reasonable people on here. So we have information that would cause a reasonable person to believe that child abuse or neglect may have occurred or is occurring. And this is going to be based on the facts and circumstances known to you. We're going to get into it here in a little bit more. You may not have all the information. So you may have this tiny little piece of information, but the information and the circumstances that you have in front of you that you know, and you being a reasonable person, if you believe that they have been abused or it's currently occurring, that's when we need to make the report. Okay. That cause for suspicion, really should be based on a perceived presence of real harm or a perceived presence of imminent risk of harm. Okay. So what that means is this perception is not always based entirely on current acts, but it could be on past acts, present acts, or both. So let's say you happen to know like there's this pattern that is happening. So the first time, yeah, the story makes sense, right? But now maybe I'm seeing a pattern of different things. And now I'm seeing that there is a perceived presence of imminent risk or harm because I am seeing that pattern. It doesn't matter whether the person that you suspect is of causing the abuse or neglect is a parent or other person responsible for that child's welfare. So maybe it's they live with a grandparent, they live with a different legal guardian, it's somebody babysitting that child. It doesn't matter whether it's the parent, the biological parent or not that you suspect, we're still going to want to call in because we have reason to believe, as a reasonable person, right? We believe that this child may be being exposed, has either been abused or is possibly being exposed to that abuse or neglect. Okay, so reporter confidentiality and anonymous reports. So what this means is that by law, reporter information is meant to be confidential. So when you call in, especially even as a mandated reporter, they are not to disclose to the parents, to the guardian. They're not supposed to be disclosing that really to anybody unless the court requests the information. And that's really going to be in a court order. I've never seen that happen. It could happen though. But technically, like I said, so let's say that you're working with a family or somebody goes out, they may absolutely guess, right? Like, oh, I only disclosed that to this person or I was only around this person, so it has to be them. Technically, CPS is not supposed to confirm that. Yes, it's confidential. We can't report who made that. That's where I think it gets a little sticky. At least, by my opinion, here in Yellowstone County. I will often see reporter information, even though it doesn't point blank say it was them, it's definitely alluded to or is confirmed by follow-up. I see that a lot in the affidavits of removal here. And it does make me a little nervous because parents are reading those affidavits of removal. And so they're actually getting to read and hear what people have said about them. So that makes me a little squeamy. I don't necessarily care for that. But at the end of the day, like I said, the reporter information is meant to be confidential. So them not sharing that with anybody else. Within the investigation, so an investigation may be conducted when an anonymous report is received, however. So there are some folks that do not feel comfortable giving their name or information, so they call in anonymously. That's great. They can still take that information and they can still conduct an assessment, but the investigation there has to be a result in development of any kind of independent. They have to corroborate the information, right? They have to find other information for the investigation to continue. So an example of this would be maybe somebody just, and actually I had this happen to me in child welfare. People would get mad, whether they broke up with me or was a drug deal gone bad or, whatever it may be. They call in a report, an allegation. You assign it and you go out there and you find that it's not true, right? That none of it's true, that it was completely made up. And so, like I said, they can take the information if it's anonymous, they can work on it for 48 hours, but they have to be able to find somebody else that can corroborate that information. Who else has contacted these kids? What's the school saying? What's the daycare provider? What's the neighbor saying? What's maybe step parents saying? So they have to be able to corroborate that information in order for the investigation to continue. So without that additional information, it's possible that the child won't be removed unless they go out there and actually find something. So it's really important, and I would really encourage folks to not call in anonymously, especially as mandated reporters. So as a mandated reporter too, here's something that's unique to you that just anybody calling in does not have access to. So as a mandated reporter, you are allowed, if the report's received, you are allowed to find out the level of response and time frame for action that CPS took on your report. So you call in something, you're going to be able to find out, did they assign it? Did they assign it? And we're going to get into time frames here in a minute. Did they assign it a 3-day response, a 5-day response? Was it assigned? And then confirm really that it's being acted upon. Okay. So you may also know limited information about the investigation. So outcome, subsequent actions. So was the child removed? Did we just offer the family services? Did we go out and assess and didn't decide there were any services to be offered? All of that you actually can have access to. But just remember too that any information that's shared with you is meant to be kept confidential. So what this looks like, I don't know. Like I said, as a mandated reporter, if they mail out a letter, what that looks like in Yellowstone County, or if you have to request that follow-up piece. But then also remember too that if you are making a call or reporting something not in your official capacity, you are not going to get access to that follow-up information. It's only when you're calling in as a mandated reporter that you're going to have access to that information. Okay. The other thing, if you're calling in as your role as a CASA, the investigative worker or the intake worker, they're actually going to be, yeah, investigative workers, they may call you and get more information, right? Even sometimes if maybe let's say you weren't even the one that called it in, but they know that you're on the case. Hey, we just got, this new report called in. When was the last time you went out and saw the child and grandparents home, right? Or when's the last time you went and saw them in school? So as a mandated reporter, they may very well get a hold of you and want to get more information or insights from you that could help assist them in their investigation. Sometimes you guys will see too that when you're on your CASA case, new referrals will come in, referral, right? So meaning a new allegation of abuse or neglect has come in. Hopefully, they're letting you guys know that you are aware of that, but that's also something that we don't want to get in the middle of. Yes, if we're asked for additional information, that's great. That's not necessarily something we're going to want to disclose all of the details on in any kind of report. Let them do their investigation, let them do their assessment. And so it could just be, yes, there is an open assessment. Yes, there's open an investigation, but we don't want to go into details while that's still open and they're still assessing. Okay, so I have concerns. What do I do with it, right? Where do I make that report? Okay, so if abuse is actively occurring, call 911, right? So if you are out somewhere or you go to a home visit or you go somewhere and it's actively occurring, 911 is going to be your best response. They can act immediately. We would have folks sometimes when I worked in child welfare call that, hey, these kids are left home alone right now. I know they're over there. Law enforcement can get over there a lot quicker. They can bust open doors. CPS cannot. And so if it's actively occurring and you're seeing it actively occurring, call 911. This would be an example. You're at Walmart. You're not in you're not in your official capacity in this one, but you see, unfortunately, maybe a parent going at a kid, right? Hitting a kid, physically abusing a child in that parking lot. You're going to want to call 911. They're probably going to want a license plate, things like that. But be aware when you call 911 and you call law enforcement, your information is not necessarily kept confidential. That's going to go into their report that law enforcement does. And as you guys know, anybody can request those law enforcement records. So just be mindful that if you call law enforcement directly or 911, they're going to ask for your information as a reporter. So just being mindful of that. Otherwise, yes, if it's not actively occurring, we're going to call the child abuse state hotline, right? So in Montana, that's called centralized intake. You guys all got that number when you went to pre-service. We have it available kind of anywhere and everywhere. It's definitely in you guys' binders. It's the 1-866-820-5437, which is kids, right? You're going to call that a centralized intake. They're responsible for taking all of the calls. Okay, they're responsible for taking those and then documenting those in their computer system. So just like we have Optima that keeps us all connected and on the same page, they use CAPS is what they use. And so it's a statewide documentation or statewide computer system. They're going to take that information, they're going to enter it into their CAPS system, and then they're going to decide, does this meet the legal criteria to assign it to the county that the abuse is occurring in? Right, where the kids live, does it meet that criteria or does it not? Okay, so they're ultimately the ones that are going to be making that decision. So centralized intake is housed in Helena. That's where it's staffed. Those specialists, like I said, they are trained. Their whole job is to screen those calls. They assess the level of risk to children, and then they're going to prioritize those calls based on the urgency And they're going to decide how quickly does a child protection specialist or an intake worker, an investigative worker, how quickly do they need to respond? Okay. So then the specialist will forward that report, the reports that actually meet criteria, they're going to forward those to the county office for investigation. So there's 6 different regions in the state, and so they're going to decide which of those 6 regions it goes to. Regardless of whether it gets assigned or not, and we'll kind of talk through some of those here in a little bit of what gets assigned and what doesn't, they're going to be in that CAP system. Okay, and they're all recorded to ensure quality and accuracy. So when you call in, it's going to be recorded and it's going to be entered into the computer system, even if it doesn't get assigned. And like I said, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But that's really where all of it happens, is right there in Helena at centralized intake. Okay, so what do you need to report? So when you make the phone call, and I've actually made a report here in Yellowstone County, and so I've been through this process. And just keep in mind, and I'll kind of reiterate this throughout this slide, you may not know all of this information, and that is okay. Just report what you know. And especially if you are making a report not as a mandated reporter, like let's go with the Walmart situation, you're going to hardly know any of this, right? Or even with your neighbor or even with a family member, you may not know all of this information, and that's okay. You're going to report what you do know. So first and foremost, who are we reporting on, right? So what are the names of the kids, the parents? Maybe you only have first names of parents. Maybe you don't know them that well, right, in a different situation. But names, date of birth of children, or general age of children, yes, they look to be 3 or they looks to be 5. So who are we calling in on? And or alleged perpetrators. Like I said before, it doesn't necessarily have to be that the parents are the alleged perpetrators, but who are we concerned is doing the abusing? Where are they at? So the current location and or addresses of the kids and the parents or alleged perpetrators. This is going to help them determine which jurisdiction they need to be forwarding this report to. Okay. Do they go to school? Do they go to daycare? Again, this is going to be helpful for the investigative worker to figure out where can I go lay eyes on these kids? Who else has eyes on these kids? Okay. What is your concern? Again, so this is going to be, okay, here's what you heard, here's what you saw, here's what you read, like what is leading you to believe that there's abuse or neglect happening. They're going to ask, about immediate safety concerns. Again, immediate safety concerns could be anything about the safety concerns. Do you know if there's weapons in the home? Do you know if there are vicious dogs in the home? What else maybe they're very anti-government, right? We've definitely worked with some of them, right? Yes, just so you know, they have cameras up, they're very anti-government. You may not want to go there by yourself. You may want to take law enforcement with you type of situation. Do you know, are drugs or alcohol a contributing factor with this family? At the reverse, what are protective capacities of the parents or caretakers? What strengths are going on with this family? Child-specific vulnerabilities. So sometimes this is going to be age. Sometimes this could be, I believe that they're a little bit lower functioning, or they're completely, maybe they are disabled and they're in a wheelchair. Maybe they are nonverbal. Whatever that might make that child just that much more vulnerable, let them know that. If you know that, hey, law enforcement's been out there the last 3 nights for whatever reason. So I know that they have lots of police involvement. That investigative worker is going to be able to reach out to law enforcement and get copies of those police reports. Okay. Make sure that your report, are there any visible injuries or marks, right? Have you noticed previous injuries or marks on the child? What facts really are leading you to believe the child has suffered an injury? Okay. Is there culture things that we need to be aware of with the family? So really the more detail, the better. But like I said, sometimes you're only going to have this little bit of information. Just report what you do know, and that's okay. So when I called in, I had very, very little information. And so most of the time I had to tell her, I don't know. I don't know. Even though, like I said, she knew that I wasn't going to have that information, she still asked me every single one of those questions. But every time, unfortunately, I had to say, I don't know. I don't know. This is literally all the information I have. It was actually an email that was sent through CASA admin alleging abuse or neglect of a child. And so I literally only had what the person had put in the email. Really though, if in doubt, report it. So what I like to remind people is that you have one piece of the puzzle. right? So you don't know who else is seeing these children in these families and may also be calling in a report, may also be calling in a concern. So maybe your piece alone isn't enough to warrant an investigation, but your piece put with this person's piece and this person's piece, okay, now we're seeing this bigger picture. We have a lot of folks calling in on the same child, a lot of mandated reporters calling in on the same child. That then may be enough to warrant an investigation and for child welfare to go out there. So you really have no idea, like I said, how your piece of the puzzle fits in with the rest. I think sometimes folks get frustrated thinking, well, they didn't assign it, right? Because you get that follow up. Well, yes, maybe they didn't assign your particular one, but maybe that's because they had just assigned the one the day before, right? Because this person had a little bit more information that called in and it was enough to warrant it, and your information just became supplemental information. So, not getting discouraged in that way, that it doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's happening. It's just maybe that for your specific report, they didn't assign it. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to go over this in a whole lot of detail. You guys have this. We'll make sure that we got it, that we get it sent out to you guys afterwards. Like I said, most of you guys should have gotten this in your pre-service. This really is just the child welfare journey, everything that we talked about. They get the referral and either it's open for an assessment or they assess it and they close it. Obviously, on this little journey that you guys can see, we're going to be down here. By the time CASA gets assigned, it's going to be over here on this path. So a lot happens before it comes to us in CASA, right? So they've had the call come in, then maybe they've closed previous ones. You guys see that on the affidavit of removal. You guys see that history of child welfare. So sometimes you'll see that, oh yes, this CPS has been involved with this family multiple times before. They never removed the child. It never resulted in court. Well, this time now it has. You'll also see that with prevention services being big, that a lot of times child welfare is going to try a voluntary plan first. They're going to try to keep those kids at home if safely as possible. And then if it gets to the point that they can't do that in 60 days or for whatever reason, then that's when the dependency and neglect cases open and that's when we're going to get involved. Like I said, I don't want to go into this a whole lot of detail, but that does happen. Okay, so what happens once you make a report? Okay, so I've called it in. What do I do with that? Or what do they do with that? Okay. So sometimes, like I said before, it doesn't matter who is the abuser, you're still going to call it in. If they decide that it's actually a third party report, meaning that this person that's abusing the child has no relationship to the child and they're not in that caretaker role, it's going to be sent to law enforcement. These are going to be, if a teacher, for example, is abusing a child at school, that's going to be a third party. Somebody, I don't know, funny example, right? Or not funny, I guess, but you see somebody hitting somebody in Walmart and they just happen to be walking by and was tired of hearing the kid cry. No relationship, no ongoing relationship. That's going to be third party. Those are going to be more of your assaults. Okay. Sometimes folks call in and it's kind of information only. There's no investigation. It doesn't meet the criteria for investigation. So sometimes it's that supplemental that supplemental information that you guys are providing. So they're still going to document that. Sometimes folks will call in for requests for services. I would really encourage folks, especially with those older kids or, hey, I'm struggling, they can always call in, they can request services. So again, it's not going to be assigned as an investigation. This could be a request for home studies, a request for voluntary services, courtesy supervisions, a request from law enforcement to assist on something, from other CPS or tribal services, like, hey, could you go just make sure that this kiddo is actually with mom, right? Like dad said he was here in Washington. Those are going to be those, like I said, those requests for services. Then you're also going to have some licensing stuff that comes in that's not going to pertain to us. You're going to have post-adoption services where they can reach out and request assistance. Really, the ones that we're going to see the most and that impacts us the most are the CPS, those child protective services, the CPS stuff. Those are the situations where report referral is going to be investigated. They meet that requirement. So it's in there and it goes on to a CPS case, the Child Protective Services case, and then it gets signed to an investigative worker. Those are the ones. So again, there's lots of calls being called all the time into centralized intake, but kind of think of it as a funnel. Here's the calls that are being called in, here's the ones, and then by the time it gets to us, those are going to be the probably the worst of the worst cases. And that's why you guys are kind of seeing that even on the priority list, because a lot of these cases or these referrals are going to be closed at assessment. They go in, they work with the family, and they close it out. Then if not, it goes to a case, voluntary case. And then if not, then that's when we're going to get involved because there was a removal. So kind of think of it as a funnel if you want to. So I told you we would briefly talk about this. This really just comes down to the time frames. So part of Helena, the job in Helena with centralized intake is how quickly do we need to get an investigative worker out there? Really the way I kind of see this with the time frames too. So priority one is more of that immediate within 24 hours. These are going to be the ones where they're going to get a hold of an on-call worker. It's actively happening, or if they don't respond within the next 24 hours, there is a substantial risk that that child is going to be harmed or even, up into including death. Right. So we need eyes on that family. These are going to be the ones where child welfare is called out, where law enforcement's actively at the house. They actively pulled over somebody, and they're arresting the parents. These are going to be those immediate ones. Okay. So typically not good stuff happening. Priority two is going to be the 72 hours of receipt of the report. Priority three is going to be within 10 days. And then priority four, fully investigated and assessed, written report, documenting determination within 60 days. So really all that means, like I said, so your priority ones are going to be, like I said, the worst of the worst, unfortunately, going down to priority four. Priority four, I don't know that I've seen a whole lot of those, but your priority three, priority fours are going to be like your dirty house, for example. Got an allegation, the house is dirty, disgusting, the kiddo's 10. Okay, let's go out there, let's assess, let's figure out what's going on. But there's also, I'm not hearing anything that leads me to believe that if I don't respond within the next day, 3 days, 10 days, that this child is at substantial harm for abuse and neglect up into including death. So that's really where they have to look at that and weigh the information that they have. That's where your piece of the puzzle, maybe yesterday somebody called in and it was a priority three, but now with the information you got, oh, we probably maybe need to move this up to a priority two or even a priority one. So that's where the information, they're going to be looking at those previous reports. Who else is called in on this family here recently? And combining all of that information together, they're going to decide how quickly do they need to get somebody out there to investigate. Yeah. Okay, so our types of abuse. Again, I'm not going to go over this a whole lot because you guys went over this in pre-service. We know there's physical, sexual, psychological, or emotional. Um, Here in Yellowstone County, as many of you guys know, this is going to be the lower percent of our cases, maybe 5% or less of our cases that come in. Typically, what we're going to see is that neglect. That's going to be 90 to 95%. The psychological, emotional piece, one of the things that I don't know gets it's a thing here, but I don't know that I hear it being talked about enough or used enough, that in the state of Montana, technically anytime a child is involved in a domestic violence situation, so they're in the home, they witness it, they see it, they're part of that, technically that falls under psychological or emotional abuse. Like I said, I'm not seeing that talked about a whole lot, but that's something I guess for you guys to be aware of, even when you're writing your reports. If they're being pulled out of a domestic violence situation, that is psychological or emotional abuse. But the majority of what we're going to see is that abandonment, that educational piece, physical neglect, I'd say is going to be the biggest. That's where your substance use falls under, is that physical neglect or that injurious environment. Um, I'd say probably the majority actually of the neglect cases are going to fall under that. That injurious environment can be anything from your dirty houses to, again, some domestic violence going on, to the drug use, to you kind of name it, it's going to fall under that physical neglect piece. That's the majority of what we're going to be seeing. Okay, so as we kind of talked about, then too, they're going to either go out, they're going to, once they do assign it and they're going to go out, they're going to go assess that immediate risk to the child. They're going to be looking at those past reports of abuse or neglect. They're going to be contacting anyone that may have additional information on this children and families. That may be you, right? As a CASA, if there's a new allegation that comes in, or even if you call in on a neighbor or a friend, you may get a phone call. Hey, we're looking for additional information. They're going to go talk to the child. They don't have to have parent permission to talk to the child. I know this upsets parents quite a bit, but they can go to the school and talk with the kiddo. They're going to visit with the family. They may be doing UAs, really anything and everything. I kind of like to use the analogy of the hospital when I talk about child welfare. So really this is the ER. Intake or the investigation workers is the ER. They're going to go and they're going to be assessing, they're triaging. What's going on with this family? What stressors do they have? Is there substance use going on? Is there mental health issues going on? Is the child have higher risk of different vulnerabilities? They're there truly to assess this family and to triage this family and decide, okay, is this something that we can fix within 60 days? Right? Assess, get them services, get the house cleaned up, do whatever we need to do. So assess them, or is this something, right? And then kind of get them out of the ER or, close it out. Or is this a family that we're going to need to move up to the actual hospital, right? Move up to the floor, move up to, whatever that looks like. Admit them to the hospital. At that point, that's where it's like, well, yes, this is going to take longer than the 60 days that I have in that assessment phase. This is something that, yes, getting them sober and that sobriety piece is going to take a lot longer than 60 days. That's really then when they move on to an official case, is after that 60 days. They can offer voluntary services. Does law enforcement need to be involved? Do they not? Certain types of abuse and neglect, so you kind of have the civil side and the criminal side. Certain ones, if it's bad enough or heinous enough, they're going to get law enforcement involved, right? So your broken bones, shaken babies, kids getting access to the drugs or even ingesting the drugs. All of those are going to be passed on to law enforcement because law enforcement could choose to decide that they have enough to also file criminal charges against the parents. So then they'll also have that criminal piece along with the civil side of DNs. Okay. Again, where we're going to be involved is those emergency placements. When they file, they remove the kids and kind of get that piece going. So that really is the last resort. If safely possible at all, child welfare is going to try to keep those kids in the home or work a voluntary out of home or a voluntary in-home plan, really to try to help this family get back on their feet. It's really going to be those worst case scenarios that they're actually having to remove the kids and file an affidavit of removal. Okay, so outcome of an assessment, not super relevant test, but where this is going to come in and impact you guys is when you guys are reading those affidavits of removal and you're reading about that previous history with the family, you're going to see these words on there. It was substantiated, it was founded, it was unfounded. You're going to maybe see some of that language. So that substantiation is really, I go out there, I assess the family, and I have determined with the preponderance of evidence that the act of abuse or neglect occurred, right? So it did occur. The perpetrator may pose a danger to the child. It meets the legal definition of abuse, neglect, sexual exploitation. So with everything, right, that I've seen, that I've done, I believe I have a preponderance of an evidence that is substantiated for abuse or neglect. Okay. The next one founded is, okay, I go out there, I assess the family, investigate. I have probable cause to believe it occurred, right? So I don't have that preponderance of evidence. I have probable cause to believe it occurred, but I don't have that. I don't have enough evidence, right? Unsubstantiated, which is going to kind of sound a little bit weird, but I go out and I assess, and I'm not able to determine by the preponderance that it happened or evidence. I'm really unable to show that any of it happened. Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll say that. Unfounded, yeah, none of it occurred. It didn't occur. I have no evidence. This would be the ones where people call in the false claims type of thing. And then close without findings. Unfortunately, you'll see this happen, and you guys will read this in your affidavits too. They go out and they make multiple attempts to try to locate the family, and they're unable to contact or make connections with the children or families. And so they close it without findings because they're unable to locate them and actually fully assess the family. Okay, so just some other quick points to be aware of. This is in your role as a mandated reporter. That failure to report can result in civil liability for damages caused by the failure to report. So this would really have to come down to the district attorney's office deciding that, hey, as a mandated reporter, you should have made this report and you didn't, and maybe it led to further abuse or neglect, death. I have only seen this happen one time, and it was more of a threat from the DA than an actual follow through. And this happened in Colorado. And it was when a physician, so the doctor, had reason to believe and should have been making a call as a mandated reporter and didn't. And it was some broken bone type of situation on a baby. And so This is also, you have immunity from civil or criminal liability for a good faith report. So this is where you don't need to be afraid too. So a person required to report who purposely or knowingly fails to report, right, that's the bad thing. But remembering that you have immunity. So if you in good faith, here's the information I have, here's what I'm reporting. Yes, maybe it doesn't come to anything. Maybe there was not abuse or neglect happening. You can't be held liable either civilly or criminally because you made a good faith report. So I know several states have similar laws, like with CPR first aid, right? If you respond, you can't be, you can't be held liable for that. So you do have that immunity, right? So always, I would say, like I said, yeah, we're going to report. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. Okay. So all of this, what does this mean for you, right? So how this applies to you. So if, let me just make sure. I can't remember. Hold on just a second. When I wanted to do my next Mentimeter. Okay, actually, we'll do this here in just a second. Actually, no, let's just go ahead and do it. So let's go over to Menti really quick, and then I'm going to talk about this. Okay. So you guys can see on here, on the Menti thing, if you call in a referral on a neighbor, are you able to know the outcome? Okay, so you're not calling in your mandated reporter role. You're just a neighbor. You're calling in. Are you able to know the outcome? Did they assign it? Did they not assign it? Was the house as filthy as I said it was? What are you going to do about it? Right? Exactly. Yeah, no, right? You're not able to know that. So only in your professional capacity as a mandated reporter are you able to know the outcomes. Okay, so good job. Good job. Okay. Looks like you guys are already going ahead of me. Okay, so a new referral is made on my CASA family, and I know who called in the report. What should I do with this information? Should you put it in your next report? Should you tell the family who called in on them? Should you make a note, an optum and not tell anyone else, or all of the above? Right. So the biggest time I see this is honestly when advocates are going through training and they're working on their first reports and we know who called in the report on is it lavender, right? And they're saying, okay, grandma called in this report. And so again, I think being really mindful of this, that as you're reading through those initial removals, those affidavits, you're probably going to have a good sense of who called in that report, but making sure that we're never disclosing that. So not putting in our reports, these children came into care on this date when grandma called in a report on them, right? So being very mindful of that is protected information and confidential information, um, and that we should not be disclosing that. Okay. Okay, so we're not going to go to that one next. Okay, so the other things that I want to kind of talk through is what would you do or how would you handle it if a child you're advocating for discloses abuse and or neglect to you? What should you do? So you go out, you go to a home visit, kiddo tells you either it's past abuse or it's currently occurring. What do you do with that information? Anybody have a thought or an idea of how you should handle that? Anybody?
So I have a thought. I don't know that I have an answer.
Okay.
Um, I think we need to disseminate a little bit about the veracity of what's being said. Um, and probably put it in our notes, our CASA, our CASA notes. And maybe ask for guidance, particularly if we have some doubts about the information.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. So yeah, the main thing first, what I would do is if you have a peer coordinator, I would well, first off, is it actively occurring, right? You're going to want to call 911, let the social worker know, hey, right, this is actively occurring. This is what's happening. If your social worker, if it's after hours, right, call that intake. Call that hotline number because they're going to be able to get a hold of the on-call worker and let them know what's going on. But yeah, let's say they're disclosing past abuse, right? So there's no it's like not actively occurring. Yeah, you're going to call your peer coordinator. This is what just happened. What do we do? most likely then they're going to get the program staff involved. And then we're going to kind of talk through that. Yes, we're going to even be there with you if you want us to help you call in that report to centralized intake. And then, yeah, we're definitely going to let the social worker know, like, hey, yes, this is what's actively happening. I just called in the report. Um, so yes, letting the team know, yes, we're going to be documenting that, but really reaching out to your PC and then like I said, most likely they're going to get their program coordinator involved to figure out, okay, what do we need to be doing with this information and how should we be handling it? So, but yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah, we're going to want to document it. The main thing too is, not asking a whole lot of questions. We don't ever want to ask leading questions. We don't want to be interviewing these kids. Again, it's not our job to investigate whether it happened or not. Our job is to get the information from the child and then pass that on. And yeah, maybe it may be something very innocent that on the surface seems very alarming, and concerning, but then once the worker goes out and assesses it, maybe it is something very innocent. But I think one, reminding people that you are mandated reporters, especially parents, or other providers. I know this is one of our questions in our interviews, right? If mom asks you not to tell anybody. So I think just reminding folks that you are a mandated reporter. And so if they disclose something, that you have to pass that on. And so just being really clear and honest with them. Same thing with kiddo, right? That we can't keep secrets and it's our job to help keep them safe. And so if they tell me something that worries me or I'm concerned that they're not safe, then I'm going to have to pass that on. And so I think being upfront and honest with folks right away that you are a mandated reporter and what that means in your role. Okay. Okay, so just kind of the last thing. This is Montana's thing. Again, this is what their number. This is what they're getting out there as far as disseminating information. Okay, so really quick, any questions before we move into our next topic of confidentiality? Does anybody have any questions right now? You guys are awfully quiet. Thank you, Denise, for jumping in. I would love to hear from other people too.
Um, Hi, Carrie, it's Sue.
Yeah,
When you
yeah.
talked about clergy having to report stuff, I keep seeing things in the news or what, and I know there was a case in Montana of some religious, I don't want to say which one because I'm not sure if I remember right, but they didn't report it, and the law said they didn't have to.
I guess I'd
Um,
be interested to kind of know more about that what their role was. So I know, for example, like youth group leaders, they have to like I've done mandated reporter training for them. Um, yeah, I guess that'd be something, yeah, so that would be interesting to know more like what their role was in the church. So even like for example, like Haven Camp or any of those church camps, right? And so yes, that's going to be yeah, so they're going to be mandated reporters, right? So they're supposed to be going through that training before they go out and supervise these kids. And so maybe it's different parts. I'd be interested. So maybe afterwards, Sue, we can find some information, and I would love to know more about that. Oh, Mary Rose says maybe Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah.
yeah, it was, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to know more about that and why they weren't considered mandatory reporters.
Well,
So
there
yeah,
was
it's
a
a
big
good question.
lawsuit, and they
Hmm.
prevailed,
Hmm.
for
Interesting.
whatever reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I took that list straight out of Montana's statute. So, yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know that Montana has made any changes to their laws recently. Like I said, I noticed that Colorado did. So, when I was down and working child welfare, you were a mandated reporter 24/7. Whether you were on the job or not, you had to report. And so, it looks like this last legislation just passed and changed it. So now it matches Montana, where you're only mandated in your professional, while in your professional capacity. But yeah, that'd be interesting. I'll have to look into it. I'd be curious to know more and what their justification was. So,
Hey,
Thank
Carrie,
you.
you've
yeah,
got 40 minutes left.
perfect. Yep, we're doing good. Okay, if there's no other questions about this, or if you have any questions, you guys also have my email. Feel free to reach out to, like if it's specific, scenario type stuff. So, okay, so this is something new that we have added to this training. And so you guys are first and foremost to be getting this information. So we wanted to talk about confidentiality, right? Something that is bestowed upon us that you guys have signed confidentiality agreements is something we talk a lot about in pre-service and throughout the life of our case. So we know as advocates that once we are appointed, we have access to a ton of confidential information. Okay, whether that's mental health, substance use, visitation, like a lot of very personal and private things. And so it's important that we read and that we understand that this order grants access to that confidential information only to be used in the service of the child's best interest, right? So we're not reading this stuff to be I don't know, just gossiping about the family or, oh my gosh, can you believe this, this, and this? Or have you seen this? Right? So, how are we going to use this information that we have in the child's best interest? And that's what we always have to remember anytime we're getting things on parents and whether it's their mental health, drug use, any of that, tying it back to their impact on their parenting ability. Is this impacting their ability to parent their child? If so, how is it impacting that? Right? So even being mindful of that in our reports. Yes, maybe parents are struggling in this, in this area. Okay, but put it in the context of how does this impact the child and how does this currently or will this impact the child's best interest? Okay. So making sure that we are always being mindful of that information. So I actually want to take us over to our next mentee, and it looks like you guys are on it a little bit. Okay, so confidential information may be shared with who? It looks like you guys are. I think this is this a voting one? Oh no, you guys are typing it in. Okay, so who can confidential information be shared with? So somebody has said only CASA personnel, CPS and CASA. Who it is allowed to be shared with, even though a parent is party to a case, it might not be a good idea to share information about the kids, like location, school, etc. Who else? Who else has thoughts or ideas? You have access to this confidential information. Who can you share it with? Feel free to type in. What are your thoughts?
Sandy put CPS and CASA in the chat.
Okay. Yep. CASA, CPS, therapist, question mark. CASA, CPS, child's attorney. Yeah, good thoughts. Okay. So yes, so CASA program, yes, first and foremost, right? Like this is where you're going to be putting stuff into Optima. This is where you're going to be talking with your PC, your program stuff. Obviously we're sharing most of this confidential information with you to begin with, right? Because we're uploading it into Discovery, so we have access to it, right? Social worker, yes. So social worker, supervisor, maybe they're out, so it's a social worker. Again, most of the time we're getting this information from them anyways, but sometimes it's us going out and seeking this information and then we're going to be sharing it with them. Okay, so the appointed case attorneys and district court staff. So what this means is obviously guardian ad litem aren't going to be, it's not going to be in the future anymore. So county attorneys, they have access to almost all of this stuff. The county attorneys, the child's attorney, and the judge, right? So we're actually going to get into another question here in a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit more about the child's attorney here in a little bit, but yeah, being mindful. So really we're going to be sharing some of this information with the judge in our report. So as a reminder, the things and the documents that we have access to, the judge does not have access to those. So really, so all of that discovery that they're uploading, the UAs, the mental health reports, the substance use evaluations, the visitation reports, the judge has access to none of those. And so that's where it's important as CASAs, right, that we're reading through those and what do we want to share with the judge? What does the judge need to know in order to make that informed decision? Okay. So speaking of when communicating with parent attorneys, right? So we have this information. I can disclose confidential information that one parent may not have access to. So is it okay for me to share mom's chemical dependency evaluation with dad's attorney? True or false? Right, yeah. So that's where we need to be mindful of what we're putting in our report again as well, because when we file those reports, they're going to the parents' attorneys. We know that oftentimes the parents' attorneys are sharing what we have in our reports with the parents themselves. So being really mindful of this. Is this public knowledge? Is this something that was already shared in an FEM? Is this something that we've already talked about? Or is this privileged information that I necessarily maybe shouldn't be sharing? Like, for example, diagnoses of a mother. So yeah, maybe it's okay that, yeah, mom completed her mental health assessment and, she's following through with recommendations, but we don't want to necessarily be telling dad of the kiddo that mom was diagnosed with bipolar, right? So we got to be mindful of what we're sharing in our reports, especially if the parents aren't together, right? When anything that we share with their attorneys, we have to assume is being shared with their clients. Okay, how about this? I can share anything and everything with the child's attorney. True or false? What are your guys' thoughts on this? So we know all of our kids have attorneys now. They have their child attorney. Should you share anything and everything with them? Okay, so we're kind of split on this one. So actually, Denise was a good one. So Denise and I actually talked about this with her case. And this is something that Alexander Roth shared with her, is that being mindful that there's going to actually be some times that we're not going to want to share things with the child's attorney. And here's an example, and this is what happened actually in Denise's case. And so, for example, mom's rights had been terminated, or like I said, they have long-term custody of this child. Mom's back in the area. CPS is aware of that. CASA is aware of that, but they do not want the child to know because they think that's going to upset her, and or she may try to run to be with her. It's just going to dysregulate her. And so when Denise was sharing this, well, not even sharing that, like had to be mindful, and Alex even told her to be careful what you share with me, because anything you share with me, I'm obligated to share with my client as that attorney, right? And so being mindful, and so there's going to be times where social worker or whoever is going to say, hey, we can't tell child this for whatever reason. We probably need to be mindful of that. Is this something maybe that we shouldn't be sharing with the child attorney? Because at that point, they may have that legal obligation to share that with their client, right? Because then if Trinity asked, hey, I heard my mom might be in the area, is that true? I mean, he can't lie to his client, right, if he has that information. So with the child attorney, it is a little bit different. When we had guardian ad litems on our cases, absolutely, right? We were both advocating for best interest. That relationship looked very different. That child attorney role is very different than the guardian ad litem role, right? That child is their client, so they have a duty to their client. And so being really mindful of that. So that might be something, if it comes up and you have a question about, it might be something that you talk with your PC or program staff about. You may talk with a social worker about, is this something that we need to be mindful of not putting in our report, of not disclosing in an FEM, of not sharing with the child's attorney. So thank you, Denise. Like I said, that was something that just came up recently, actually on her case. So. Okay, so let's go back over. Good job on that. Okay, so let's go to our next slide. Okay, so in this one, I want us to kind of talk through. So again, unmute yourself. I would love to hear from you guys. I want to talk through whether some of these, if you would think it'd be, is this a breach of confidentiality, or is this me maintaining confidentiality? Okay, so that's what we're going to do on this one. Okay, so we'd love to hear. So the first one, you are discussing the case with your PC, your program coordinator, or other court-approved parties. Is this, yes, you're maintaining confidentiality, or are you breaching it?
You're maintaining.
Maintaining it.
Yeah, good job. Yep, absolutely. This was within our role. We're having these conversations, right? We're staffing these, absolutely. What about bringing your granddaughter along for a visit with your CASA kiddo? After all, they are the same age. You think they're gonna get along great. They have a lot in common. So you just decide to bring her along. Is this a breach? A breach. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Breach of confidentiality, right? We can't be bringing other people on visits with us. They can't be going to the visit. Absolutely breach. How about telling your spouse that the mom on your case relapsed?
Breach.
Yeah. Shouldn't really be discussing our case, right? Yeah, with anybody else besides the people that we talked about before. Okay. And it's hard, right? Because this is your life and it takes an emotional toll and there's going to be highs and lows, but really making sure that, yeah, that we're not blurring those roles. How about promising on the dad on your case that you're not going to tell anyone that he has a new girlfriend living with him?
Breach. You're not supposed to promise.
You shouldn't do that.
Yeah,
I have no
exactly.
responsibility to the father.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so again, kind of going back to, ooh, that this could potentially impact, right, the best interests of the child. I can't promise that, right? Because this could have we're looking at reunification with dad. Yeah, we need to be talking about that, right? So not promising. How about ensuring that you're somewhere private when joining the court hearing via Zoom? Is this a breach?
Maintaining.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's going to happen, right? You're at the airport, you're at the coffee shop, making sure that you're somewhere, you have your headphones on, you're doing something so that other people can't hear. You guys joke, and I definitely agree. Montana and Billings, it's a small, right? It's a lot smaller than you think. And so you never know who's around or who's listening. What about posting pictures of you and your CASA kiddo on Facebook?
Breach.
And you're
Breach.
using it, but you're using it to encourage folks to volunteer, right? Look at this cute little kid I get to save, right? Right.
No.
Yeah, absolutely a breach. Yeah, we can't be posting pictures. We can't be identifying them. Got my cute little CASA kiddo. You should be a CASA too, right? So no. How about keeping your case notes and documents secure with passwords and or locked?
Maintaining.
Yeah, so absolutely. So again, making sure, I think there's some, gosh, even like when I worked in child welfare, that was a big deal, right? Like, so not taking case files out of the department, right? Or in your car, because gosh, heaven forbid you get in a car accident and then there's all these, confidential files in your car. And yeah, so making sure, that's what we talk about, you guys having access to an email that your spouse doesn't have access to, that you're keeping those documents somewhere secure or that they're password locked. Because again, you just never know who's around, who could be looking at what. And so, yeah, making sure that you have securities in place that they can't have access to the information. Because again, we have access to a lot of very, very personal stuff, right? So treating it like your own information, how would you protect your own information? Okay. How about telling the child's attorney that never mind, I already gave you guys the answer to this one. Giving a copy of your court report to the grandparents who are also the placement.
Breach.
Yeah, correct. So unfortunately, yeah, so placements, foster parents, unfortunately, they don't have the same level of access to some of that information that other folks do. And so I know that's really hard sometimes when they're asking or you have a really good relationship with the placement. I think that's probably one of the hardest ones. Is to refer them back to the caseworker. And that could be your helpful little hints like, hey, you might want to reach out to the social worker to find out what happened in court today, right? Type of thing. And so referring them back to the social worker. Okay. How about not discussing my case with the judge at the appreciation event?
Maintaining.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, if you run into the judges, again, it's a small town. You can't pull them. Yeah, don't be pulling them aside and asking, hey, have you made that ruling on that termination yet? Type of thing. Again, because that's ex parte communication. It's not happening in the courtroom, and so that's definitely a no-no. So we don't want to be doing that. Okay.
Hey, Carrie, you have a question in the chat. Rhonda wants to
Yeah.
know, is it okay to take pictures of kids and share only with CASA staff and the family?
Yeah, absolutely. So with CASA staff, and so we actually ask you to take pictures of the kiddos and then get those to us so we can get them into Optima because then we attach those to the reports. And so as far as the family goes, you're going to have, every case is going to be different. So that's going to be something you're going to have to ask your social worker. Do you have permission to pass those on or share them? And so with that, before you shared like with a birth parent, with birth family, or with grandparents that live out of state, you're going to want to make sure that you get permission from the social worker before you share it with anybody else besides CASA staff. And like I said, then when we do it, we are attaching it to the report, and then that report is only going to parties, right, that get access to that. Now, yes, are parents going to see it in that? Yes. I was in court one day and we had attached a picture of a little one and he had spaghetti all over his face. I can't remember whose case it was. And the parent's attorney looked at it and said, "Oh, what a great picture," and showed it to the parent. And everybody obviously loved seeing this picture of the kiddo with spaghetti on their face, right? And so that was okay. But yeah, I'd say if you're sharing it with anybody else, like grandparents reached out or dad reached out from prison, absolutely. Do I think they should have those? Yes, but we need to be getting permission before we're the ones sharing those. Lots of times social workers set it up where the placement, so the grandparents, the foster parents, whatever, are already sharing some of those pictures and that information with the family already. So yes, do I think it should happen? Yes, but you need to get permission and be talking with the social worker first.
Carrie,
Yeah,
yeah, I think one of the things we have to remember is there's a lot of metadata on pictures nowadays. We're not just
yes,
sharing the picture, we're sharing the time, the location. We're sharing
yes,
a whole lot of information about that child that the picture may be fine, but perhaps the other information on the picture, if it's not been removed, might not be.
correct. Yes, absolutely, Sherry, because and that's why we say you can't post pictures on Facebook, right? Because, and once it's out there, right? And so, yeah, being mindful of that, I guess, even just in your own personal lives, that, yeah, once it's out there, it's out there. And yes, there's so much tracking that can go on with pictures behind the scenes. Yeah. So just being aware of your own personal security with that too. Yeah. Okay, what else about confidentiality? What other, and I know we're going to have a point or a spot at the very end where you guys can ask other questions. Really, I guess I would say final thoughts on this is if in doubt, before you do anything, reach out to your PC or your program staff. This doesn't feel comfortable. I've never heard from this person that's emailing me asking about this. Most of the time, we're going to have, you refer them back to their social worker if they want information. But yeah, if in doubt, you need to reach out. Like we need to maintain this. This is a privilege that we have access to the information that we have access to. And we definitely don't want something bad to happen where we lose that access to this stuff. So being really mindful and aware of that. Again, we don't want anything negative or bad to come out of it just because we weren't doing what we needed to be doing to maintain that confidentiality.
Hey, Carrie, just a clarification. Some
Yeah.
people may not know what metadata is. And Sherry answered that. Metadata is all the
Oh,
data
perfect.
that is attached to the picture, which includes location, time, date, size of picture, etc.
Yeah.
So,
Well, especially now with AI, right? They can take a picture and put you in a provocative situation that really didn't even happen, but they got your picture off of Facebook and now all of a sudden you're, I don't know, right on a beach somewhere with, yeah, who knows what, right? So yeah, being AI has definitely changed the game, I think, for sure. So yeah, definitely being mindful of that. Any other thoughts, questions about confidentiality right now that you guys can think of? Okay. Okay, so now we are going to move over into our conflict of interest policy. So really what that means is a conflict of interest occurs when there's personal, professional, or financial interests have the potential to interfere with one's responsibilities to the CASA program or the children that we serve. Okay, so it's even just the potential, and not always is it always going to result in possibly a conflict of interest, but it could pose that, right? So that's something that we're going to talk through that we need to be aware of, that we're talking through. This even starts at the very beginning when folks even want to come be an advocate with us. Sometimes there's folks that we have to turn down because it'd be too much of a conflict of interest, right? We can't have, so for example, I think Emily Beard, right, went and came through and she was going to be a CASA. Well, then when she became a GAL, child attorney, a parent attorney, that's too much of a conflict of interest, right? And so even sometimes us just being aware of that potential conflict, some of them we can work around and we can work through. Some of them we just can't. And so it's making sure that we're aware of them so that we can talk through them and see, is this something we can work with or is this something that we can't? Okay. So and I don't think I have a Menti for this one. Let me just make sure. I should have put myself a little note. So that's a lesson learned for me of being mindful of which PowerPoints have that. Okay, so would you take this case? So this is where I want some interaction from you guys. Could this be a conflict of interest? Okay. You recognize the foster parent as someone you go to church with. Could this be a potential or is this not? Any thoughts from anybody?
It is. Yes.
Rhonda
Good,
says
good.
no.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna say no.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the size of our community, I would say no, but if it's a, if it's more like a personal um relationship, then you just recognize them. It could be,
Yeah.
but it may not be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you said that perfectly, Sterling. There's one thing just to recognize them, right? Because yeah, churches are big and Billings is small, right? Like, oh, I think they go to my church. Yeah, absolutely. You don't have necessary relationship with them. You just happen to go to church with them. You're not going to go approach them, right? You're not going to have that conversation. You're not going to be going up to your kiddo then. Exactly. So yes, if you're more than just recognizing them, then it potentially could be. But yeah, if they just happen to go to the same church as you, I would say no, that's not going to be a conflict of interest. How about your child on your case, or the case that you're about ready to pick is in the same classroom as the kiddo on the case. So your kiddo would be in the same classroom as the kid on your case. What do you think about that one?
That's more of a conflict.
Yes.
That would be a conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, that could get a little bit, right? So that's where I think it's hard, right? We know things happen, placements change. So maybe even kiddo went to a different school to begin with and now they're moved. That's going to be something that you're going to want to let your PC and your program staff know that, hey, I think I have a potential conflict of interest now because the kiddo moved and now they're in the same school and even in the same classroom as my kiddo. That we're going to want to have a conversation around that, right? It puts your child in a weird spot. It puts the CASA kiddo. Yeah. So it could be really messy, right? How about this one? You've never met anyone involved on this case, but you once applied for a job with the county attorney's office. Is this a conflict?
No.
No.
No, no, exactly. Right. Yeah. So no. So it's really about like, what is your relationship? How do you know the people involved in the case? Right. Now, yes. Now, if you went to go work in the county's attorney's office, yeah, that's going to be a conflict. But you applied, you didn't get the job, right? You got a better job somewhere else. Yeah, not a big deal. Okay. How about you're pretty sure you went to high school with the dad's second cousin on the case? Conflict or not?
I would say no.
Yeah, probably not. Now, what if you went to high school with the dad? What if you were in the same grade as dad? You guys graduated together. What do you think?
If you knew them, it would depend on how well you knew them.
Well, and what your relationship was.
Mm-hmm,
If it was Billings, no. If it was Broadview, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Are we talking a class of 5 or are we talking a class of 500? Yeah. Did you guys run in the same circles? You guys got an underage together? You guys skipped class together versus, yeah, we were in the same class. I knew who he was, right? But being mindful of that, and sometimes you'll even hear judges and attorneys on cases bring this to the judge's attention, like, just to make you aware, Your Honor, right? Like I represented dad's mother in a whatever case, right? Like, I don't feel like it's a conflict of interest, but I want to make sure, Dad, that you don't feel like it's a conflict of interest, right? So you'll hear them even have these conversations in court, even with the legal world, to throw it out there. Like, do you feel like it's a conflict? But more importantly, does the parent or the other person on the other side of the relationship feel like it could be a conflict as well? Okay. How about the grandpa in the case is your neighbor who sometimes watches your dog?
Yes.
Yeah, that could get sticky, right? Because then grandpa's coming over, it could look like you're playing favorites. And what if grandpa becomes the preferred placement? Grandpa's putting you in a really weird, awkward spot. Yeah, I could see that one being a potential. Yeah. So I think, yeah, some of these are kind of fun, funny examples. But I think, yes, being aware of that this town is a lot smaller than you think. So one, being mindful of that before you pick a case. And sometimes we're aware of potential conflicts, so depending on where they work, okay, we need to make sure that you don't have kids this age, right? Or in front of this judge or, whatever it may be. There's a lot of them we can work through. And then there's some that we possibly just can't work through. And so being mindful of that, not only in the beginning when you're picking a case, but then throughout the life of your case. Okay. So one of the things I want to do next is go to our mentee. So I want you to imagine if an advocate stayed on a case So you stayed on your case and you had a conflict, and then it came out in court. Somebody brings it up in court. Hey, judge, just so you know, I think I want this CASA off the case. I think they're biased because we dated the same girl back in high school, right? And he didn't like me because I stole his girlfriend, right? So there's that conflict. You stay on it. What happens to the child's case and to CASA's credibility? So that's your mentee. That's what I want you to be thinking about, right? So we stay on a case. We knew there was a conflict. We didn't say anything about it. We didn't address it. What are some possible outcomes to this case and to CASA? So this is where I want you guys to type in on your mentee.
If you don't have the code, it's at the top of the slide.
Yeah. 8608-3632. Absolutely. So far we have, yeah, so anything in our report, right? The comments could be seen as biased, right? Our credibility is called into question, right? So it's going to make, it only makes the agency and the program like, but also it's like, were you really advocating for the child's best interest, right? Yeah, credibility could be lost. The case could have even more issues because of it, right? It could set back the entire, the case. And did anything this CASA say, was any of it true, right? Credibility is damaged, may cause your report to be questioned. Yeah, so absolutely. Disclosure, conflict, resign from case, and ask to have a new CASA for child. Absolutely. So that's where it's just really important for you guys to be honest with us. Like I said, we may talk through it and we're going to document it and decide, no, yeah, whatever, right? Not a big enough conflict. But we're going to make sure we have that documented, and we'd much rather hear it from you than a judge calling us and saying, were you aware that blah, 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 that Sherry did blah, blah, right? We'd much rather hear it from you guys and be aware of it and have a plan in place and either, remove you from the case and get you a different one, or like, okay, who else do we need to disclose this to try to keep you on the case, right? Because it's not that big of a conflict. And so really being honest with us so we can talk through it, work through it. It's not the end of the world, if you have to be taken off the case and a new one given, because we all want what's best for kids, and we would hate to be a barrier in their case. We would hate to become a complicating factor in their case or to potentially impact their case. And so we definitely need to be mindful of that. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go back over to our PowerPoint. I promise we're almost done. Okay, so really, and I actually think we are pretty much done. So just as a final reminder on confidentiality and conflict, you guys have all signed forms saying that you guys are aware of them and that you'll abide by them. That is something that we do take very seriously. And if it's something that if it's breached, multiple times or in a pretty serious way, it could cause you to be, taken off your case and then actually ultimately dismissed from the CASA program. So I think this is just a good reminder, on confidentiality. Our role is very, very powerful, whether we recognize it or not. We have a lot of say so. We have the judge's ear and we have little lives, potentially in our hands. And we have a lot of trust placed in us by the information that's shared with us, by the information we have access to. And so we really need to be mindful of that and hold that trust and that information very, very, tightly and very securely. So if you're ever unsure whether something is appropriate to share, pause and check in with your CASA supervisor. It's going to take 1 minute. It can wait a day or two, right, if it needs to, because I'd much rather you pause, check in with your supervisor, especially, like we all kind of get those feelings like if you're really questioning whether you should share it or not, most likely you shouldn't be sharing it, right? So trusting that gut a little bit. But if in doubt, pause and check in with us. Conflicts of interest are going to arise, right? So just making sure and remembering that we all have a continuing duty to disclose any actual perceived or potential conflicts of interest as soon as you become aware of them. Again, sometimes maybe kiddo got moved and you weren't aware that kiddo got moved until a week later, or when you show up to pick your kid up at school and, oh my gosh, there's my CASA kiddo, right? It could happen, right? So as soon as you become aware of that conflict, making sure that you reach out to us. And this is not limited to include, but not limited personal involvement in open CPS investigations or connection even to a case participant. So like I said, very small world. And so if anything like that comes up, please, please, please let us know so that we can handle accordingly and have your back, right?
Hey, you have a question from Rhonda. This
Yeah.
is, can we tell the client who our kids are if they ask, who the kids are if they ask? I guess is what she's trying to ask.
What kind of client? Like who are we talking about telling that to?
This is coming from Rhonda. Rhonda, do you want to unmute and tell us what you're talking about? The kid's mom.
So, I don't know if I don't know if I quite get your question, Rhonda, but yeah, so parents will know that we're the CASAs for their kids. One, we always definitely encourage you, if safely and appropriate, to introduce and meet the parents and, work with the parents in a certain capacity. Their attorneys will know. And then when it gets to the point where, we may be observing them in parenting time, kids on a child home visit, so the parents are definitely going to know that we're the CASA on their case. We actually have a couple of documents now that we created, and I think we're putting those in blue folder that you can even give the parent that explains your role as CASA to the parent so that they truly understand that. I go to initial hearing, so they definitely know that, yeah, I guess that you're going to be the CASA. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, Rhonda. Yeah. Sometimes I think, being mindful too that in certain situations and cases, the social worker will ask you to pass on information to certain people that normally we wouldn't. So getting that in writing from them, getting an email. So for example, I had an advocate under me. Social worker asked him to be the point of contact between CPS and the school. And so when a big life change would happen or visitation wasn't going well or something was happening that was impacting that child, social worker asked him to please let the teacher know that so that she could be aware that, hey, kiddo may not be in a good headspace today or might be having a rough day today because of XYZ. And so the social worker asked that advocate to be that go-between, not only between the school, but then also with the therapist. And so he kind of played that go-between of getting information from them and then sharing information with them. But that was what the blessed, expressed permission of the social worker, because that's just something that she could take off of her plate and that he could kind of be that go-between between them. So there are going to be situations and times like that. What I'd always tell, my advocates or even in caseworkers, when it comes to schools and teachers and other professionals is we should only be sharing information with them that pertains to the child and only in the fact of that could potentially impact the child or other children around them. So we should definitely not be sharing like with teachers and schools and other folks, Boy Scout leaders, whatever, that mom just relapsed or hey, dad just got diagnosed with anxiety. Like we shouldn't be sharing anything of the parents. We should only be sharing things that, like I said, that pertain to the child. Hey, child really struggles with anxiety, or hey, child learns best when this, or hey, loud noises, really seem to get to him. Or hey, he tends to be a biter, right? So you might want to watch him with other kiddos. So really only sharing information about that child and only information that could potentially keep that child safe or other children around that child safe. So again, if in doubt, ask us and we'll be able to kind of walk through that because unfortunately, or as you guys are very, very fully aware, there is no black and white in these cases. There's no one answer for a lot of these things. Sometimes things are very case dependent, caseworker dependent, child dependent. And so there's always going to be a lot of different variables. Okay. So with that, I want to go to our last mentee. So this is an opportunity if you still have questions and you don't necessarily want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat box, but you still have questions about anything we talked about today, whether it's the mandated reporting, the confidentiality, or the conflict of interest. Feel free to type it in Menti if you'd rather remain anonymous, or yes, pop it into the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question there as well. This is your opportunity to ask those questions.
So I kind of have a strange question.
Yeah.
I was called to jury duty yesterday, and as I was sitting in the crowd waiting to see if I got called, I was wondering, have you ever had an instance where a CASA shows up and like the dad of their child is on trial? Have you ever had that happen?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of that, but yeah, that could be. But you know what? I'm hoping that would get you off of the jury,
Right.
But
right? Like,
they
hey,
ask you, you know, what is your reason for being excused? How would you can't say,
yeah, um, yeah, and maybe just letting them know that, without disclosing that, yeah, I am a court-appointed special advocate and I am, assigned, a case in this judge's court. I do feel like it'd be a conflict. And if anything, like, is this something that we could talk about in private, things like that. But I would think even just letting them know that, hey, I'm a CASA, and so sometimes, I think we could definitely talk through that, but I would hope it would get you off of the jury actually. But no, I've never known that to happen, but it could happen.
yeah, I was like, oh geez. Because you
Yeah.
never know
Did
what
you?
you're gonna, you know, what
Yeah.
case you're gonna have until you get there.
Yeah. Were you ultimately put on the jury or not?
Oh, I wasn't. Yay.
Oh, good. I'm kind of one of those weirdos where I would love to sit on a jury, but I've never had the opportunity. So,
Well, I have before, so I've had
okay.
the experience. I'm good now.
Yeah, great. Other questions? Anything that's maybe confusing or that you still feel kind of uncomfortable or unsure about?
So Carrie, I have a question, and this is too long to write out. But let's
Okay.
say you have a really good relationship with your foster parents and the kiddos, and you're in Walmart and you see them, you're with your significant other, and the kiddos come running up to you, and the foster parents want to talk to you, and your significant other knows all your friends, and then afterwards they're like, who was that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm sure that's happened to other folks on here. How have other folks handled that scenario?
I uh I actually have told my wife that if I don't introduce her, it's probably because it's CASA related.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so if I'm, yeah, kind of weird and yeah, ignore you. Yeah, yeah, kind of that heads up. Yeah.
I had that happen. This is Shayla. I had that happen
Uh-huh.
at a community event. And I kind of gave, I've also done similar where I say, well, if I'm doing something, and this was the case I'm advocating on, my mom and son actually went the opposite direction. I was like, I'll meet you over here. And so they left and kind of assumed that that was it.
Yeah,
It's always weird at first.
it is. We would have some of these same conversations even with caseworkers, right? You'd run into a family at Walmart and they want to talk about your case. And so I think sometimes too, it's just yeah, you can't obviously tell your spouse, right? Kind of ignore them, you're not going to introduce. But I think if foster mom wants to try to talk with the case about you, I would just let her know that, why don't you give me a call, or I'd be happy to call you a little, is tonight, can I call you later tonight when we're more private? Or, is this something that, maybe can you text me about tomorrow? It's kind of just nicely, but referring them that, yeah, like we shouldn't be talking about this here type of thing. I think with your kiddos too, and this is what I would do with families that I ran into, is just a quick little hug, how you doing? And then just you initiate the leaving of that contact, right? So, oh yeah, like they run up to you, oh, so good to see you. You guys have fun, right? And then just kind of exit. And then you could always follow up with foster mom later. Hey, not trying to be rude, but I'm also, trying to protect, and have confidentiality that I need to follow. And so I think, yeah, the nice warm
one
hug,
minute.
and then okay, and then you initiate that leaving of the relationship. But then, yeah, I think with your spouse, just having them understand that, yeah, if I don't introduce you, or if I, kind of am kind of weird, it's probably because there's confidentiality going on.
Great
Oh, okay. No, we have
answers, thanks.
one. Yeah. So I know we only have 1 minute. So if you still have a pending question, a concern, a worry, you guys all have my information. Feel free to send me an email, and I'll probably pick up the phone and we'll probably talk through it, because I know sometimes it's easier just to talk through different scenarios. Otherwise, I know we were recording this. Sherry will get it out to you guys. And then if you have any other questions once you go through and read the slides or are processing it later, again, feel free to reach out to me. We're here to help support you guys. And I know this is really sticky. It can be really gray, but other than that, I want to be respectful of your time. I know it's 1:30, and I want to thank you guys. Again, I know this is not like a super, super sexy topic to talk about. So I just want to thank you guys for taking the time, because it's a super important topic. So with that, thank you guys very much.